I'm going to kick off our message, and in a little bit I'm going to invite up Pastor Nathan Betcher to share as well, because this morning in our Relationship Matters series we're speaking about singleness, and we had this revelatory idea that it'd be good to get a single person to speak on singleness. Isn't that novel? And one of the things about singleness is it's ironic that Christian churches are often characterized as being groups or institutions that most seem to promote a view of marriage, that people need to get married. In fact, I remember my old pastor, when I was, how old was I? About 20 at the time, just saying, looking at me and just saying, "What's wrong with you? Why are you still single?" He was kind of saying it as a joke because he knew I had no game with the ladies, and he was just giving me a hard time. But there's definitely an implicit and also an explicit culture in Christian churches that seem to endorse and encourage people towards relationships, which can be a really good thing. But my observation is that sometimes that has been a very challenging culture and environment for people that aren't in relationships, and people that are single, or people that are single again. Also, just acknowledging in a church like ours, around half of the people are single or single again. And so in the same way that it's good to talk about relationships, it's also good to talk about the place of singleness as not just a part of our church, but a really important part of church life. Because the Bible, as we'll discover, has an incredibly elevated and exalted vision of singleness. The scripture that opens it up so beautifully is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. If you ever think that the Bible is just bland and boring and you've heard it all before, read 1 Corinthians 7, because there's something in 1 Corinthians 7 for everyone, and I think it challenges just about every culture throughout, whether it be Eastern, Western culture. It challenges us, and there's something in there that just gets you to think, wow, does the Bible really say that? And that's why I love about the Bible. It doesn't come to us on our terms and just agree with our culture. It actually challenges us and shapes us. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we'll pick it up from 1 Corinthians 7 verse 7. The Apostle Paul, ever humble that he is, starts by saying this: "I wish that all of you were as I am." Man, he's a confident dude. And what's the context? He's talking about singleness. "But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it's good for them to stay unmarried." Everyone say good. That's what he's saying. It's good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. "But," everyone say but, "if they cannot control themselves," yeah, it's funny, "they should marry. For it's better to marry than to burn with passion." I think that's amazing. What's amazing about this passage, when I just talked about the culture of us as Christian churches sometimes, is that the Apostle Paul exalts singleness to shocking levels. When I say shocking, it shocks. You think, does the Bible really say that? And it's not the only place that the Bible says it. One scholar has argued that in all of the world religions up to that point, and really since, no world religion has exalted singleness as not just acceptable, but as a virtue and as a gift like the Christian faith. And certainly for the early Christians, singleness was seen as better than marriage in some circumstances. There was certainly a de-idolizing of marriage in that culture. That culture, just like ours, idolized marriage as the most important thing. And as we know from just talking about this in church life, when we have an idol, it's not that we are worshipping something that's bad, it's that we are making a good thing the most important thing. Think about things in your life. Think about houses. Think about possessions. Think about friendships. Think about relationships. Think about something that's good that became the most important thing. And when we make good things the most important things, they cease to be good in our lives. And they can actually start producing ill health and bad negative consequences. So, not only is singleness exalted, so really Christian communities should be places that lift up singleness, not just as an option, but as a virtue and as a good. Okay, so my question is how do we as families and as a community, how do we make singleness seem as great and as good as what the Bible does? How do we actually create a community like that? I think that's a really good question to put out there. Secondly, singleness is a gift. This is what the text says. Paul says, each has your own gift from God. One has this, another has that. So, what is this gift? Growing up, I remember all of my friends said, I don't have the gift of singleness. I don't have it. I don't want it. Give me another gift, God. I'll take administration. I'll take pastoring. Just don't give me singleness. And there used to be jokes about that. But in a New Testament context, this is what a gift is. A gift is the ability that God gives to build others up. So whether it be a spiritual or a material gift, if God gives that to you, Sonia, it's for building others up. If God gives Kingsley a gift, it's for building others up. It's not just so we can hoard it and receive it for ourselves. So what is the gift of singleness? Well, for Paul, it was a gift that he received that gave him freedom to live out his calling in ways that would have been impossible had he not been single. And I also believe that singleness doesn't matter whether you eventually do get married. Singleness is a season that we all go through. So it's really important whether singleness is a long-term calling or whether it's a short-term season, that we embrace the season and we embrace this gift and this opportunity that God's given us in our single time of life. Because I speak to many people that miss out on the blessing of God in the season that they are in, when maybe down the track there is marriage or there is a long-term relationship. But losing the joy and the opportunity in the midst of singleness. And I think we do forget, not only Jesus and Paul and the other, but really most of the people that wrote the history of the early church died for their faith, and they died without families. And we just it's very easy to whitewash that from the history of the Christian faith, isn't it? It's very easy to think that they were middle-class people with wives and kids, and they sent their kids to Christian schools. No, they didn't. They gave everything, and they died often without ever marrying. And so this is the heritage of our faith, and we should be careful to honour it and encourage it for those that God calls. And then it goes on, verse 29. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that and I couldn't go through the whole text, it's too long, so he skips ahead. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not. Those who mourn, as if they did not. Those who are happy, as if they were not. Those who buy something, as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of the world, as if not engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away. Once again, all that he's saying in this text is he's not saying marriage is bad. He's just saying do not make it the most important thing. He's not saying possessions are bad. He's saying do not allow possessions or houses or income or salary to become the most important thing, because everything that we build on this life will eventually pass away. We are living in a world where Jesus has come and God's kingdom is expanding, But once Jesus returns, a lot of these things that we have been building will pass away. And so marriage is to be enjoyed and desired, but not to be engrossed in. And that's the word that he uses, not to be engrossed in. And there are things in your life that you might be seeking or desiring, but you might be seeking and desiring them too much. And you might be in a relationship and you might be seeking and desiring something that you don't have. And we need to be really careful that for those of us that are single, that we're open to relationships, but we don't seek and desire it as the ultimate goal of our life and the ultimate thing that will make us either happy or not happy, because that is just not God's will, and it's not the way that God actually makes us happy either. Verse 32, I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs. How can he please the Lord? But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of the world and how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you might live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. So what the text is clearly saying here is that God is not about restricting our rights. He's not about restricting our freedom. He's about providing us and liberating us into freedom. He is concerned with us flourishing in our full humanity, but also he's concerned about his mission in the world, and that we will flourish in such a way that makes the most impact upon other human beings. And so for some of us, our mission is to be married people, and for other of us that are single, God has a calling and a good plan for your life connected with your singleness or your marriage. Just something as an aside, it's amazing when you read this text how liberating it would have been and how it's been read differently throughout history. The early Christian church was built upon, a lot of their caregiving ministries were built upon widows. And widows they would come into the Christian church because it was the only place that they could go where they would find love and security, but also a sense of mission and calling, because in that society when women would be widowed, what would happen is they would have to get married within 2 years. In fact, they would get taxed incredibly highly if they were not married within a couple of years. And so they had this incredible financial burden if they didn't get remarried. In fact, many women would end up homeless, some would die, and those that had to look after kids had no hope to look after their children. So they were almost forced into this economic slavery where they would have to get remarried. And so they would marry someone just for financial security. And so the Christians came along and said, you know what? If your husband has passed away, you do not have to marry a man to find security for your life. Isn't that wonderful? You do not have to place your trust for your future in a man. I love that. I love the fact that that was such a liberating ethic that released all these women to not be reliant upon men for financial security, but actually the Christian community could look after these women, and these women in turn, primarily women, were able to look after these people that came into the church and needing care and looking after for. And I think, isn't that the wonderful thing about God's vision for marriage and for singleness? It's that we will be free to serve him and to live for him in the best way that he knows we can. One of the things that I'm aware of, though, is I'm speaking from the context of a married man. I've been married since the age of 22. I was such a young boy back then. Now I'm an old man of 33. And I'm also aware that it's one thing to get up here and talk about the gift of singleness and the goodness of singleness, but I am coming from the perspective of a married man. And one of the things I really want to hear from is Pastor Nathan, a great man, great leader in our church. He's got some fantastic things to share, and also some personal aspects from the perspective of a single man in our church. So will you put your hands together and welcome Pastor Nathan Betcher? Thank you, Nath.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everyone. Good to have the opportunity to share with you. As Tim has suggested, in Christian circles, it is occasionally singleness can be a little bit stigmatic, and often when I meet particularly Christian people for the first time, and you get into the small talk, and one of the questions that inevitably comes up very quickly is, "So, are you married? Do you have children?" And perfectly reasonable kind of question. Now I have a pat answer, which I give very quickly. I said, "No, I'm very happily single." And people look at you. You get the strangest looks, like, "Oh," as if to say, "Is that entirely possible to be both single and happy at the same time?" The wedding reception scenario. Single people will be familiar with this. When you go to a wedding reception and you sit down, and it's a bit weird because all your friends are on the table next to you, and and you look to one side, there's a very nice single lady one side, a very nice single lady on the other side of you, and in fact everybody on the table is single, which seems a bit unusual, and so a bit of small talk goes on. The host, is on the other side of the room just going, and so you kind of ignore that, and then a bit later in the night, dancing going on, whatever, and the host kind of comes over to you and says, "Isn't that a shame? All these nice single girls here, they've got makeup, hair done, the outfit, and none of the guys are dancing. You should get in there. You should dance with them." To which my response is usually, "What? I hate dancing." Dancing is like, well, I'll probably offend somebody, so I won't go there, but... And then you kind of, it's like, "Oh, is that the time? Okay, better get moving." Now, look, there's nothing wrong with matchmaking in that fashion, even though it is meddling in people's lives to some degree. Look, people do meet their life partners in those situations. I'm not knocking that. But I have to say, as a single person, and, even as I get older, I'm quite satisfied with the life choices that I've made. And being single has enabled me to do a lot of things that I couldn't have done if I was married and had children. If I was married and had children, I'd love that. Those are wonderful life experiences. But, I've been able to do things like travel very freely, spend a lot more time in ministry than I would have been otherwise. Also to complete a lot of study as well, which I couldn't have done if I'd had just the financial commitments, the time commitments to family. Now, how do you know if you have this gift? Because as Tim suggested, I think some people are genuinely afraid of having this gift. It's like, "No, Lord, please, I don't want that." It's not like a bad Christmas present, right? The kind where it's like, "Ooh, what's this?" You open up, "Oh, celibacy." It's like, I really hope God kept the docket, because that one's going back to the shop. You know what I mean? If this is a gift for you, there's probably a couple of things that are very apparent. One is that you probably don't feel the need to be in a relationship. It's not that you fear being in a relationship, but you just don't feel the need to be in a relationship. I've often said, if the right person had come into my life at the right time, and that was God, I'm very open to that. Also, you maybe don't have a strong desire for raising up a family of your own. Some people really do desire that, and that's a great thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But one of the key things, if you're a single person, maybe you don't have that strong desire to do that. Those who do choose that path then kind of recognize that in their life, and they don't regret it later on because they made those life choices up front. We have some very good biblical models to follow, and Jesus is one. Obviously, Jesus was a single man, and so he understands what it means to be single. It says in the Bible that he would go to lonely places and pray. It's not that he felt lonely or felt alone. Instead, he actually used that time. And, particularly for single people, how do we use those alone times? Well, Jesus use the time to reflect, to pray, renew himself, to be refreshed, so that when he was with people again, he was in top form. He was actually able to give of his best. That time that he had spent renewing himself in Jesus, he was then able to give out to people. Now, Paul is also another example, as Tim's mentioned, and we had a look through that 1 Corinthians 7 passage. But elsewhere, Paul talks about dealing with struggles and weaknesses, and he shares that in 2 Corinthians. Now, even though he does not specifically mention singleness as a personal struggle for him, many people do find it so, and his comments here certainly apply. So let's have a look at that. 2 Corinthians 12, Tanya actually mentioned this earlier on when we were singing before. It says, "Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my side, a thorn in my flesh." Kind of just like an annoying little thing there that won't go away. And Paul says, it's like a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. How many times have we prayed like that for all sorts of things? God, I'm just fed up, I'm frustrated with this thing, can you please just take it away? But look what God said to him. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Whether people are single by choice or by circumstance, we all need to rely on the sufficiency of God's grace to provide for us in all situations and to hold us up when we're at our weakest. The reality is that some single people struggle with and face a whole range of different issues that married people may not necessarily face, or certainly not in the same way. For example, if they tempted sexually, a single person has to handle that differently to the way a married person does. When it's financial burdens, the financial burden of being a single person, sometimes it can be a blessing, sometimes it can be a struggle if you're living on your own. Or social acceptance, if that's just that feeling of not feeling connected or socially accepted. And those are all difficult things, but what that scripture shows us is that God's grace covers all those things and more. And so if you are a single person or single again here this morning, I just want to say that if you struggle with one of those or maybe another issue to do with your singleness, make a commitment today, even just in your heart, to say, God, I know you cover all things. You have that covered. Now, as a church, how can we respond? I think we have a role to play as church family. And one of the issues that a lot of single people face, at least at some point, is loneliness. And this is where the church can be at its best and provide community. Have a look at this little scripture from Psalm 68. It says, God sets the lonely in families. How good is that? God's heart and God's desire is to bring in lonely people, lonesome people from the outskirts and engage them in relationship. Not just in relationship with him through his son Jesus, that's a wonderful thing. But he also wants us to be connected in church community and church family. We have an opportunity to do that for all people. I have to say, I'm very rarely feel alone because I'm constantly surrounded by people. So whether it's friends, family, co-workers, you know, we share meals together, we do ministry together, and that's fantastic. So when I go home at the end of the night, I'm not kind of thinking, oh gosh, you know, here I am coming home to empty house again, or I'm alone. It's like, no, God, thank you for that. I'm refreshed and renewed for the day ahead. Now, it's more than just being around people, because you can be in amongst a whole lot of people and still feel alone. It's more than just being around people. It's about doing life together, walking with people through their life circumstances. And that's one of the great privileges of the Christian journey, is that we get to do life together. And I have been, I've experienced this many times. I've had people who have been like spiritual parents, spiritual grandparents to me. And let me give you a couple of examples. We had a lovely couple in the church several years ago, both now gone to be with Jesus. That was Len and Dot Thompson. Some of you would remember them. And in my late teens, I had very bad acne, quite bad acne. And I had taken some medication to kind of clear it up. It started to clear up, get better. And just as it was clearing up, I remember one Sunday morning, just out in the foyer out here, and Dot, a beautiful woman, she came up to me and she reached up, because she's shorter than me, if you can believe that. She grabbed hold of my cheeks in a very grandmotherly fashion. She said, "Oh, you have beautiful skin." Now, she had no idea. I hadn't told anybody that I was sensitive about that. And I think that was actually a spiritual gift in her, just to impart something that made me feel good about myself and built my self-esteem. Beautiful couple. And I have lots of adopted grandmothers in the church. Where's Joan Hyland? Joan, where are you? She's adopted grandmother. I love her dearly. And we have several of those. And I want to encourage you. There are some of you here who could step up into that role to be spiritual grandparents to people. Spiritual mums and dads. I've often said Pastor Bill's like a spiritual parent figure to me. We had another man in our church many years ago. He was our music director. His name was Neil Palmer. And I was in awe of Neil. He was very competent, but he was a great encourager. And so as he would encourage me, that was great, and you're playing. And as I started to get better, I aspired to be more like him, not just in his musicianship, but also in his character and his leading of people. And there are many people in our church like that who have encouraged me and helped to mold and shape me over the years. And then, of course, there's spiritual sons and daughters. When as younger people, we choose to be obedient to God and allow ourselves to be modeled and mentored by those around us and successful Christian examples. And it was funny because a couple of years ago, I was looking around, particularly our creative ministries team, and thinking, where's all our spiritual parent figures gone? Well, we used to have lots, where are they all gone? And then it suddenly hit me that after 20 years of doing this, that maybe, I was meant to be stepping up and I was meant to be one of these. And so I started to think that way, particularly with our creative ministries. But, that applies also with some of our young adults, other single people. I understand some of the struggles they go through. And so God has enabled me to walk with people in all walks of life and to help them through life circumstances. So let me say, the church needs more spiritual grandparents, spiritual parents, spiritual sons and daughters. We need to rise to that challenge and the responsibility of our wonderful inheritance in Jesus. And I want to say one more thing just before I finish up. So we need to know that God's grace is sufficient to cover all circumstances, that he desires to see us connected in family. I think God also desires that as church family, we empathize with the broken and those who are struggling. And that includes some of the things that single people face. I'm very proud of this church that we have always sought to embrace and cover single people from all walks of life. And that includes widows, people who are single again, single parents, their kids. It's a very honourable thing. At the times that I have felt lonely, I recognize it was perhaps more about me retreating from community rather than people who reaching out to me. Because I recognize that there were always people who are wanting to reach out, but doing so just in a sensitive way, not imposing themselves on me. They were just understanding and not pushy about it. And I think that's really important. Last week we heard from Shirley Basket sharing her testimony and talking about just the pain and the loneliness that can come from being a same-sex attracted person in a church. Wouldn't it be amazing if, as a church, we had a reputation for being welcoming, accepting, and just understanding of the struggles that same-sex attracted people face, without necessarily affirming sinful behavior or affirming relationships, not necessarily talking about that. But we have an opportunity to be family to same-sex attracted people who choose singleness and who want to follow Jesus, and to do that honorably. How amazing would it be if churches led the way in that? It's not impossible, you know. There's a lot of media out there that says churches are anti-gay, they're just against, but that's not the case. Wouldn't that be amazing? That's actually one of my prayers, and it sounds crazy, but it's not impossible. Churches could lead the way in being welcoming and accepting of all people. It's like Tim said before, it's written on the wall over there, a church for all people. That's what we want to be known for, and we have an opportunity at that. And single people, look, face a whole range of different issues. We need to empathize and understand and be church to those people. But there's one more thing, and I want to finish on this, that's even bigger than understanding feelings, and that is understanding the truth of God's promises for us. And this is for all of us, whether we are married, single, whatever. And I want to leave you with these words from Isaiah 41. Let's have a look at this and just let these words sink in. So, do not fear, for I am with you. That is God's promise. If you ever feel alone in any circumstance, let these words just resound in your heart and mind so that it's etched upon your heart, that you would never forget these words. I am with you. God is with you. And so let me leave you with those three things this morning. God's grace is sufficient in all circumstances. He desires to see you connected in church family, and He is with you. Thank you, church. God bless you. Thanks, Tim.